I think that when I call now, they are like, oh, hi, Barb, you know. This guy isn't that friendly to me. But,
maybe we should
but we do get weekly reports. For 3 weeks, we've gotten weekly reports. Right. We should do what?
Fax this to the Des Moines Register and let them crack it open. They do everything else, why not this? This is absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, I really. One question that I have is why, if you look through these daily, why Eagle Grove? What's an Eagle Grove?
They must have to pick up a kid.
They have kids in Eagle Grove.
Why would we have to pay for Eagle Grove? Or, I mean, Sac.
All the way. Well, obviously she doesn't know her way around this part of Iowa.
Well,
But here's what it says. It says RTC, which is Radnor to Sac.
Yep.
And then from Sac to Eagle Grove, and then from Eagle Grove to Thor. Evidently, Thor is is that where the center is at?
No.
Thor is right by Fort Dodge.
Between Manson and Fort Dodge.
It's right outside. If Thor is 2 miles from Fort Dodge, then that's probably it, because it's only a couple of miles from Fort Dodge, not a couple of miles from Manson. Is Thor about 2 miles?
Well, whatever it is, we would have nothing to do with Eagle Grove. That's way north of Fort Dodge.
Way out of the way to add to the mileage.
And that's 75 miles. That's $125 times 2 every day. That's $250 a day.
And I don't mean to throw this all at you to fight this either, but I think this is ridiculous.
Still doesn't.
Oh, I know.
We have nothing to do with that. And it has nothing to do with WLA.
I think I mentioned it last week.
No, I'm actually at the point where I say, let them sue us with money, honestly. Because really what I think is going to go on is, like you said, so many people are sitting back being frustrated with it, just giving up. Now, if we can do the same thing, or we can spend a couple grand, which I think is maybe wasteful on attorneys, but somebody needs to get a hold of this to where their tuitions, I don't care about paying the tuition, that seems like it's a reasonable amount. But getting the kids there, and when we have no control over it to begin with, that's ridiculous too. Plus, we don't know, you say that the weekly reports don't come or whatever, and I believe that. We don't know if these kids were even where they're at, because you sit back and ask, oh, when did they change? Oh, yeah, they just moved, they got placed. Well, we don't actually know if they got picked up today.
She told me, she said,
exactly.
you are the first superintendent who's ever even cared about getting the reports. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, every superintendent ought to care about getting the reports. And I said, if we're going to pay you what our district is paying you, then if I never read, I didn't say this, but if I never read the report, you owe it to us to give us the report, and you owe it to us to tell us on every given day if that kid is placed in a different program. I said, so he said, at this youth shelter, how was that decided? She said, well, I'll have to look. And she said, well, I think it was law enforcement and parents. And I said, well, so why wasn't the school ever notified that he had a change in placement? It didn't. Well, it reduced the cost, actually, because then his transportation went down to $34 a day. And she said, well, you know, nobody's ever asked, no superintendent's ever asked. I said, but it's our responsibility. You should start the protocol of every time a kid's in, there's a contact person in a school district, because maybe they'd start caring if you would talk to them and let them know, because they've given up. I talked to the superintendent from Rockville City, Manson, Southern Cal, and they're just like, yeah, the transportation's too much. And I gave up on it for a little while, not this last one. But, and it's been like a dialogue to John of, oh, you can't believe this. And
usually you can't believe it.
Well, we've decided that if, as a school district, we operated the way it operates, if the DE visit this week would put us out of business. We also decided we should start a transportation system like this, you guys will, and be hauling for Radnors.
I'll drive for you.
But at any rate,
I think we don't pay them.
We'll get a second semester bill, none for SAC. Well, we will, because they'll still bill us for this. And then for Walleye Goblin, we'll have this convoluted thing for those 2 kids. So,
I agree with Brent, let them sue us for it. That's kind of where I'm at. Honestly, I am. I know that it's easy for me to say that, because I don't have to deal with it. You're going to have to deal with it. You're going to make a phone call. It sounds to me like you're making them anyway. It sounds like maybe for the greater good of everybody involved, somebody needs to start making it. And if they're really busy, maybe they won't get busy enough to hire a lawyer to sue us. We'll just get breach of reputation. We'll see how busy they are. I think it's ridiculous. I think maybe the way to go about it is you're going to have them come back and sue somebody, so that now you can say, okay, we'll explain our situation, and see if anybody else believes us. I'm sure we'll have to pay it, because I think that's how the law will work. But maybe somebody through this whole situation will sit back and realize that it's wrong during that process.
Maybe it'll get somebody to look at it and lower it too. Okay, so we have to pay it this time, but maybe it'll get it to lower it.
It seems unfair, the transportation cost. It seems particularly unfair when there's no communication, no review. And I'm not really being critical of juvenile court officers, but at their whim, really, they place a kid, and then that starts the billing for us. And I don't know what sort of say we can have in that, but certainly, I just don't get how that can be so easy to have happen that, oh, we're going to place you at Radner's and you guys are responsible for it.
Right.
When we try so hard to budget things anyway, and then all of a sudden these things appear.
Well,
I get the special ed kids way more than I get the gen ed kids. But
well, if you sign the agreement on 12/4 and they finally sent you the agreement, then I say we probably owe them from 12/4 into 12/14, and that's it.
Yeah, prior to that, we had no agreement.
There was no signed agreement then.
Well, it depends what the judge said to begin with, though. I mean, some of that stuff becomes effective as soon as he stamps the page and says he's a place in Radner's and he's documented living SAC, so.
And I told the judge at that time, if you're going to place these kids in, you pay the cost.
That's my point. Maybe that's the kind of stuff that needs to be looked at later on. Maybe the next judge won't be like, oh, yeah, that's going to suck for somebody, but I don't care. He's going to have to think of it a little bit further than what they have been, because they obviously aren't thinking. So.
And they always pay out. When I called the probation officer, when I called his superior, and when I called the judge, he said, you're the first school that's ever called. I said, well, guess what? I'm not stopping, so figure it out.
All right, so it's not paying unless somebody sees the mortgage register.
That's no problem. We can do more Dodge Messenger, City Journal, Des Moines Register. Let's not be friends.
I don't know.
Well, to be honest with you, you can sit back and say, I can personally say, I don't have a clue what they're doing for this student. I mean, I don't. They don't issue the reports on time. I've never seen them. They've made they certainly haven't held up their end of their bargain as far as I'm concerned. So, whatever.
Do you have to send the kids there?
We don't even know if the kids were even living in our district.
Why are we sending them there?
They court ordered. It's court ordered.
It almost feels like we have to have a representative of every court, every kid goes there.
Exactly.
You know, it's sad.
We should at least be notified in time to, so like this time we can set up transportation. Yeah.
Well, and I think that one of the reasons that we found out was because we've been raising a stink, and so did you know that starting Monday, that was on Thursday. Did you know? Well, then but we had enough time to get a hold of Southern Cal, and I just said we can't fill the transportation request out until we see if they're ready to transport again. So Phil calls them and says, okay, what was off a week and a half ago is now back on. If you're ready, and they were like, yes, we are. And so we scrambled and talked to the driver again, and he said, yep, I'll do that. Because part of the issue is at night, those kids don't get released until 5:45, so you're asking someone to be there at 5:45. And I get it that the program's longer, but you're asking someone there to be there at 5:45 and then come back, and so it's kind of an odd time to work. But we had a guy that we just said, can you promise us she'll do it through the end of the month, or through the end of the school year? Because once it gets to summer, and the kid won't be finished with the program, he couldn't possibly be finished with the program yet, then they pick up when we don't have school, they pick up the transportation cost.
Who's they?
That's a joke.
Radner.
That's a joke, isn't it? They pick it up all the time.
Or if they have school on a day when we don't have school, because they follow the Manson Northwest Webster calendar. So if they have a school on a Friday when we don't have school, then we don't get charged for that. So I wasn't saying that like it was start going out, but pardon?
How do we know when you're there?
It's on his, well, when we get our weekly reports show that, because it's got all this behavior information day by day. Actually, when we get it, it's very good information.